Gamanjobat. The other day I was reading a piece by Vazapushavela, and I noticed striking similarities between Georgian and Japanese cultures. That is the closeness to the nature. In Japanese culture, nature is quite central, and the favorite items we use in our literature or our art is such like birds, flowers, or landscape or moon. This is a picture of my favorite artist, Kawai Gyokudo, who was active from the beginning of 20th century. This is two birds sitting on a plum tree flower, and sasa bamboo is in front. So this is a very typical flower and birds drawing. The artist was trying to describe the beautiful Japanese nature, which was, according to him, gradually disappearing. So if you take this closeness to the nature, it is also true in the case of even food. So if you look at this picture of Japanese sweet, which my chef created, it uses cherry blossom petals, which was salted for preservation. And he uses pinkish color in order to create the atmosphere of April. In Japan, cherry blossoms bloom in April. In Japanese restaurants, even some of them change menu every month in order to cope with the change of the season. The four seasons are very distinctive in Japan, and the changes are so gradual, and I think, reflects in a very delicate nature of our culture. So if you look at this fan, this is another piece of art, but it describes the cherry tree and cherry blossoms. So this is another example of how close the nature is used in our art and culture. Even in literature, in our poetry called haiku, which is consisted of 17 syllables, it's the shortest poetry form in the world. Even in 17 syllables, there has to be at least one word that is connected to one of the four seasons. And another form of similar nature, this is a form of poetry, short form of poetry in Japan, is called tanka, and it is consisted of 31 syllables. My favorite anthology of tanka poems in Japan was written in 10th century, and it's called Ise Monogatari. The main figure in this anthology is an aristocrat who was prominent in its capital, Kyoto, but after the political battle, which he loses, leaves the capital with disappointment. And as he makes the journey to countryside, he suddenly finds so many iris flowers blooming in a pond. And he suddenly feels the strong nostalgia towards his former home and former times. And he reads a poem which is included in this anthology. This is a very famous scene in Japanese cultural history. So many artists, after the anthology was written, used this scene in many forms of art. So this picture that you see in front of you is from this scene. So you see the iris tree sticking out from the pond, because iris, they grow on the water. If you dim the light in a dark room and closely watch this painting, you would notice that the painting the iris that is sticking out is just sticking out from a mist that covers quietly from the water. This is a reproduction, of course, of the painting of the 18th century, and the original is exhibited in the United States, one of the museums there. But clearly shows the closeness of Japanese people's feeling towards the nature and its connection with the literature of 10th century. So I talked about this closeness of our nature. Let us show you the picture of Japanese garden. I took this picture when I was in Hikone City in central part of Japan. It's actually a sister city of Georgian old capital, Seta. And that's the reason why I visited before I came to Georgia. But if it's famous for a Japanese garden, as you see in this picture, in case of Japanese garden, different from European gardens, they try to imitate the real nature. So if you see the trees planted in this garden, they are planted in a manner to look like they are imitating the real nature. I took this picture from a room, Japanese style room, and you see tatami mats on the floor. In Japanese rooms, we sleep on tatami mats, relax. So the one room can be used in many different ways. The second picture is a picture of a tea ceremony room. Tea ceremony is kind of a ritual, and we call formally in Japanese tea ceremony sado. Sado means way of tea. Why way of tea? Because the procedure is like a way through which we pursue our own goal. And according to the artist who perfected the art of tea, or way of tea, who was active in the 16th century, was Sen no Rikyu. And he created the concept of wabicha. It's a concept of, if I may translate, it cannot be translated into English, but I will try. It could be translated like rustic tea. Rustic means natural, a little bit simple, and so forth. So you have to recognize that there's no eternal things in real world. And you have to recognize that peaceful mind is so valuable to each one of us. Tranquility is very important. And that's the concept, the central concept of wabicha in tea ceremony created by Sen no Rikyu. So I talked about the wabicha, the tea ceremony under the concept of wabi, the rusticness or tranquility, and using the tea ceremony rooms, which has tatami mats on the floor. But of course, there are cases where we can do the tea ceremony in Western style rooms or outside of your house. So in those cases, we use this kind of furniture, a table, suitable for Western style rooms or outside, and where you can boil your water and make green teas. But even in those cases, you have to use the same kind of tea bowl that you see in front of you. These are very simple, not much decoration. You put green tea powders and pour hot water, mix with a brush, and then you drink like this. So whether it's Western or Japanese style rooms, this is a typical, very simple tea bowls that we use. I talked about the way of tea. We love to use the way because probably it's based on our natural character that we love to pursue a way to achieve a kind of ultimate goal. And if we apply this idea to sports, then we can easily think of martial arts in Japan. Martial arts in Japan, like judo or kendo or karate, By the way, karate is now included in Olympics that will start this month in July in 2021. These are one of the many different forms of Budo. Budo means martial arts in Japan, but also again, we say way of fighting. Do is way, and Bu is fighting, so Budo is way of fighting. And that leads me to Bushido. Bushido is a codex of samurai, the warrior class in feudal Japan. So this is a book written later in Japanese, but it is a translation from actually English, written by a famous Japanese prominent person who tried to explain the importance of Bushido, the samurai's code of conduct. Of course, the samurai warrior class has now disappeared, so the Bushido is already not applicable anymore. But I think many of these elements of Bushido is still alive in Japanese society, like courtesy, mutual respect, sense of obligation, discipline. All these are still quite alive in Japanese culture. So in case of each individual in Japanese society, they oftentimes put organizational goal above your own individual goal. So sense of self-sacrifice is a strong nature still in Japanese society today. So once we have a very strong sense of achievement and organizational goal, I think it was very effective to achieve national goal, and that was probably this sense of achievement or discipline was crucial in our post-war success. We were trying to catch up the advanced countries, advanced economies in 1950s, 60s, and 70s, which we achieved in those later years. Now we are being followed by other countries. Maybe we're caught up already in some of the countries. So we now need a new national goal. I think national goal is quite important for unifying the nation, a sense of unity. And now you can think of many different national goals that we put in front of us, but one of them could be achievement of the carbon neutral society, where we will have no emission of greenhouse effect gas. And we put the goal as 2050, so it will be in 29 years from now. We need to use a huge amount of advanced technologies, and we actually need the huge leap forward in innovation. But once we set this goal in front of us, I think we can move forward in a united manner. Another example of a national goal in recent years is digitization. I know we have been in this year or epoch of digitization for many years now. But under pandemic, we have noticed that we have to do more. For example, in Japan, traditionally, before the pandemic, we often used name stamps. It's like this, name stamps to identify yourself. So you just stamp on a paper and you will establish your self-identity in this traditional way. But under COVID, it's very difficult to have a face-to-face meeting and use this kind of name stamp in order to identify yourself. So now we're moving away, not totally, but at least partially, from this very interesting tradition to a digital signature and other digital way of establishing your identity. So this is another goal that we set in front of us. Probably our society will be changing, our culture will be changing gradually in accordance with our move forward towards further globalization or further promotion of advanced technology, while trying to keep our culture, traditional culture, as well. I think the reason why we were able to keep this balance between modernization and tradition is probably, at least in my opinion, because of our openness. We've been learning from advanced culture from China in 8th, 9th, and 10th century, and later from Western cultures, starting from the latter half of 19th century and the 20th century, and we're learning from everybody right now. And whenever we learn from outsiders, we were able to bring in the most advanced, the best examples from all over the world. So we were very open-minded, flexible, and we are even curious. We were Japanese, have been very curious nation. And another also interesting part of this introduction of advanced culture and technology is that we always bringing in those cultures and technologies straightforwardly. Maybe we try to modify them in a way that suits our own tradition. And wherever there's always a room for improvement, we always try to improve them and bring this better experience back to the world, to those places where we learned from. So I think this kind of a Japanese cultural tradition of flexibility and openness will continue into the future. And I hope that this will continue to be a success and key for Japan. And I hope this example and experience will be useful to Georgia and other nations as well. Thank you very much. Lidia Matova.